We're glad to welcome back with us Rob Congdon. He's an expert on Europe, its history, policies, and interactions with other nations. He's an extensive traveler and speaker around the world on what's happening, particularly in these areas as it relates to the nation of Israel and biblical prophecy, which highlights the role that a realigned Europe and Russia will play in the days that lead up to Israel being the focal point of the world, all of which these things are happening as we speak. He is a regular commentator on the well-watched Prophecy Today program. Rob, thanks for being with us again today on the Conservative Commander Radio Show. We're glad to have you back.
Well, it's good to be with you again.
Since last time you were with us, which actually I looked it up was back in December, we talked in a general sense, but since then things have obviously begun to unfold in a significant fashion there in Ukraine. And we just spent the last half hour going through things that related to what's happening there. But I want to get into some very specific things with you from a different perspective, because your focus is Europe, alignment of nations, from a prophetic or biblical viewpoint. The controlled media, as we know, and most other media, try to analyze what's happening around the world from a perspective that, in my opinion, is pretty much purely political or social. But there's another aspect that I think we'd got to go into today, and that's this. So I'll dive right into it. Russia has taken Crimea, stands ready to threaten all Ukraine. Most analysis and governmental propaganda reduces the standoff to an aggressive Putin and Russia, a weak EU, and a weak Barack Obama. But from a biblical perspective, I want to ask you this question. Is it necessary for Ukraine to be a part of what is referred to as Gog and Magog and to come back under the control of Russia? Is this what we are witnessing in this current conflict that continues to unfold?
Well, I think it is, and I would just preface everything from my viewpoint, and you brought it out well. If you start with a biblical view of events and you see how they could possibly be fitting in with what you read in the Scriptures, I work from the book of Daniel, book of Revelation, and many of the prophets. Clearly, there's going to be a future day, as it described by the prophet Ezekiel, called the latter days, when there's going to be an alliance of nations, which you've mentioned is Gog, Magog, that will come against Israel. We also read about another alliance of nations that I have said, and many have said, is going to be a reformed Roman Empire. The closest thing to that today is the European Union. And I think many of the news sources have missed the aspect that the European Union is gaining through this situation, as is Russia, and the U.S. is in reality starting to decline. So it's not a simple East-West. It's not a simple Ukrainian democracy against Russia that's trying to become a strong bear again. It really is fitting closely to what we would envision in setting the stage, if you will, for this battle that is recorded in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Okay, now, we actually talked a little bit about alignment of nations in the previous half hour. I want to pursue that just a little bit more. It very clearly is appearing, as you're stating, that there is an aligning in the standoff, and in my opinion, is much larger than just simply who controls Ukraine. Certainly on the one side, there are, I'd say, the BRICS nation, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, who appear at this point to be siding with Russia, stating that they want to drop the use of the dollar, and they've been working for that for some years, which if they do will destroy our economy. The other side is the EU, NATO, International Monetary Fund, the United States. I'd like to see if you're putting anybody else into that. But is this the way you're seeing it? And I'd like you to take and expand upon the two aspects of these two entities coming together. Flesh it out for us so that we know who is on both of those sides, and if it's what I said, and then really what is the significance of them coming together here in this appearance of conflict or whatever, in this fight over what would appear to be the fight over Ukraine.
Well, what I like to do is I like to look at maps, and I look at history and dates. If we look back 50-some years ago, the European Union formed with 6 nations of Europe. Today it has grown to 28 nations. If you put on a map of Europe, you start seeing this growth, and you add to it the growth of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was an early alliance to protect against Russia and its USSR groups. If you start looking at both of them, you see a steady movement moving from the west to the east that is moving toward Russia. And as they occupy lands, we remember that the EU has basically indicated they plan to be an empire, a world empire. They believe they can bring peace and prosperity to the world. So they are a growing empire, and I have noted in my book that they could go up to 106 nations is their ultimate goal. So they are moving to the east. From the Russian standpoint, Russia has been trying to align with several nations to reestablish what was once the USSR, not just with the idea of conquering the world, but being a competitive empire. So this is a clash of two empires. Interestingly, as we place the European Union map to an ancient Roman Empire map of AD 117, we find the lands are starting to overlap and be identical in the goals and the countries they are working with to bring into the EU. If we take the Russian map and we add the countries that are currently aligned with Russia in this area, we find that they just happen to be the ancient Scythian Empire, which is what's described in Ezekiel 38. So it's like these two empires are clashing together, and we can, based on our presuppositions of the scriptures in the latter days, one would be the ancient Roman Empire, and the other would be this ancient Scythian, or we would today say Russian Federation Empire. So the overlaps and the coincidences are hard to avoid. It doesn't mean we're necessarily about to see this battle, but it certainly says that such a thing could happen in our day.
Into the mix, as you're describing the Western and the Eastern, you have stuck in the middle there Turkey, and you have the entire Middle East, the Muslim world, which frankly Russia doesn't like. They're negotiating with them. I mean, Russia's the largest killer of Muslims in the history of the world, and so they try to keep them contained. They also want world domination and have threatened to eliminate us and Israel and all of that. Are they a third entity, or do you see the Islamic world aligning as it would appear with Russia, or is that to explain where you think they are going in this whole picture?
Okay, I do see them aligning with them, and you're correct. It's kind of an odd arrangement, an odd couple, if you will. Moscow under Putin has been very anti-Islamic and has been actually against many things that we are against in terms of what they see in the world around them. But Russia has a growing Islamic population, a significant growth of population in recent years. Now, if we take the countries that Russia is working with called the Commonwealth of Independent States. It's a loose organization that they've pulled together. They brought together some dozen countries to their south that they have formed an alliance. If you match those countries, such as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, some of the others there, and the Ukraine, you find that they, again, match up the very same countries that Gog, Magog of Ezekiel 38 describes. All of those countries are Islamic. And this I find a very interesting thing. They're Islamic, but they're not Arab-descended countries. They're Islamic, but not from the line of Abraham through Ishmael. So what we have is, it's like Russia's looking and saying, for us to succeed, to influence the Middle East, and most people are missing this, to keep their seaports open to the Mediterranean Sea, which is part of what's behind this whole thing. They have formed an alliance already with these same nations that are all Islamic. So I think it's the kind of thing, they don't necessarily like them, but they need them for their goals and for their purpose. And interesting, we keep saying this, parallels the scriptures.
Let's put Israel into the equation here. We haven't talked much about them today. How is what's happening up there impacting, or can or will impact perhaps Israel?
Well, there's really two bases that's involving Israel in this whole matter. I've written about this. The point is, Russia is trying to rebuild. One of the ways they're rebuilding is becoming the, if you will, energy center of the world. They're going to supply natural gas to the world. They're going to supply oil. They're already a significant seller of these products. Their reserves are enormous. They have a developing competitor. Europe gets most of its energy from Russia and coming through the Ukraine. But they are now turning, and this has just been in the news in the last, we're talking a couple of weeks, starting to discuss with Israel about natural gas coming from the offshore lines that they have dug, the wells they have dug that Israel has dug. Israel is becoming a financial competitor to Russia. When we read in Ezekiel, one of the reasons they come down, Russia comes down to Israel, is for prey. That means for plunder. They could do two things by attacking, from their view, Israel. One is they could obtain more of the world's natural gas resources, and they could eliminate the competition. If they ran it, they could charge what they want. So there's a real economic gain, if you will, for Russia to come down to Israel. There's also, according to the Bible, this spiritual pull. It says God will pull them down like a fish. God has purpose for both Russia and the Scythian countries, and he's going to deal with them. It says in the scripture some of them will come because they just hate Israel and God's people. If we look at some of the allies that we're looking at, one of the things Ukraine's doing is forcing Russia to get closer to Iran, closer to Syria. Both of those are allies in this Gog-Magog alliance. Their purpose isn't energy. Their purpose is they just hate Israel and God's people. So we have this two-pronged reason. But for Russia, if you just did a pure economic analysis, you'd say, yeah, I can see why they do it. It's not right, but I can see why they do it. So Israel is coming into the picture. And as I said back in November, I said, watch Ukraine. This is a big issue. It's going to get much bigger. Israel will soon be involved in this whole situation, and I think it'll become even clearer to many people as they realize the economics and the ideological hatred of the countries of the Gog-Magog alliance.
I think that's a great comment. I want to go to Rick. Rick, hold on just one second. I want to make one comment, just a comment, and then go to Rick Trader here. I find that the interest that you're talking about, Russia allying with and becoming the energy center of the world, that back during the conflict with Syria, which the line obviously that our president drew and then didn't follow through, during that time, Saudi Arabia reached out to Russia and offered to Russia to take over OPEC and to control the energy sources in the Middle East if they would back off of their support of Syria. And if I put these two things together that you're talking about, those two sources, they in fact absolutely would control all the energy, and that would be a most significant thing. So I'm just going to go to Rick now, and if you want to comment on that on the other side, then please do that. Rick, got a question here.
Well, Rob, do you want to comment on that now before I ask my question?
Well, I think that's true. There's a lot of debate. If you study deeply into OPEC, you're not sure the Middle East has got as much oil as they said. They've got to start, the old phrase is hedge their bets. They may need some alliance with Russia, so they would love to see Russia move down into the Middle East from an economic standpoint. They may need Russia. Now, biblically, Russia shows no interest in those countries, but we know that some of the other countries to the South Sudan are involved. So it's hard to say where it's all going, but certainly for Russia, the economics is there. You could expect this influence trying to be controlling the other competitors, let's say it that way, and make them part of Russia instead of competitors.
Rob, how would you answer someone who would ask the question, why are we talking about Israel? I know you, in a sense, prior you mentioned some of the reasons, but why are we talking about Israel? Why is Israel important to us? And why should we care what happens there? Is it moral? Is it biblical? Is it economic? How would you answer somebody asking these questions?
Well, I answer it simply to have a good world view of what's happening in the world today, where the world is going. You can't ignore the scriptures, the Bible, and what God has planned. And because of that, you find that Israel is a key to the latter-day events. To ignore Israel, to not care about Israel, not see what the Bible says about Israel and the other countries, is like closing your eyes and trying to understand the world situation. You can't. So you have to bring it in. When you look at world events, the world continues to cycle and start focusing back to the Middle East and Israel. So any intelligent person who wants to understand both today and where the world's headed, their worldview has to include an understanding of Israel and what God has said would happen to Israel. They may not believe it, they may not believe the Bible, but they can't ignore the incredible accuracy that the Bible names, in fact, the very countries we're talking about today. So it's vital to have a good worldview, and spiritually, without understanding that, you'll never understand what our life is for today and what it's going to be like in eternity and what we're going to do there.
Thanks, Rick, for that question. Rob, I'm going to come back to you as we're winding down here. Let's go, kids, stay on Israel perspective there. It appears that, as I've said earlier, Ukraine does not expect help from the European Union. They expect themselves to be on their own, but they don't have a whole lot of military equipment. A lot of that was given away or with that kind of thing. Israel, on the other hand, does have some means, and they have a clock that they've kind of implemented, or relative to Hezbollah and Iran with their threats and moving ahead with their equipment. And really, they had talked about that their line in the sand was actually really coming up about now, and they don't expect to get any help from the United States either. They expect that whatever they're going to do, they're doing their own. Should we expect to see some action by Israel in the next few months, in your opinion, relative to Iran and or Hezbollah, those that are sitting around them with increasingly sophisticated weapons and so forth?
Well, I think the answer to that, or from my viewpoint, is I'm looking at the other things happening on the world stage in these events here, and you can't help but see that if Russia is going to align with Iran, and the very steps being taken by world governments are really pushing that alignment, the timeline would seem to be getting closer and closer. At the same time, there is the possibility, and I always point this out, that as this alliance grows between Russia and Iran, Iran might be asked to hold off a while because Russia says, look, we've got a greater plan as we all plan to come down and get rid of Israel once for all, rather than you being Iran versus Israel. So I think we definitely are in the days of setting the stage, and it is moving closer.
All right, we have just 1 minute left here, and I want to go from here. Do you see Russia perhaps actually carrying through on their threat to drop the dollar and cause a real significant change, perhaps leading to an emergence of the new world order in EU and a diminished U.S.?
Absolutely. Once the founder of the EU said he could conquer the world through economics and the environmental control or regulation, the dollar has to go, and that will give the EU the power it needs to become the true alliance.
All right, we're going to have to go. I want you to give a quick update, please, just in 30 seconds here, no more, where people can go to follow what you're doing and so forth, Rob. I want you to be able to do that.
Okay, if you go to CongdonMinistries.org, that's CongdonMinistries.org, you can find the materials we've written on this very subject, other articles of use. Congdon is spelled with a G, CongdonMinistries.org.